Hello, everyone, and Merry Christmas. I know it's December 28th, but if we take the 12 days of Christmas seriously, it's still appropriate to wish each other Merry Christmas. Today in particular happens to be the Feast of the Holy Innocents, and I wrote a song with Malcolm Guite for this day called Refugee, and I have him in the studio, so he's going to introduce it, and then I'm going to sing you the song. So here it is. My name is Steve Bell, and this is For the Journey This Week.
The first album of Steve Bell that I was ever sort of part of, and I had the joy and privilege of collaborating with him on, was his record Keening for the Dawn. And we were kind of united in a vision for that. I had been feeling for a long time that we'd somehow lost the whole season of Advent. You know, it's the wisdom of the church that we have a fast before a feast, and then we really enjoy the feast. We have Lent before Easter, and Advent was meant to become Christmas, but Christmas was just filled up with all these kind of tinsely tunes and bling and razzmatazz all the way through December. You were sick of it by the time you got to Christmas. And you didn't have that leaning and yearning into the darkness, or the recognizing of the dark themes, the difficult themes, the terrible, treacherous times, the slaughter of innocents, all that stuff that's going on around. Jesus isn't born into some cozy little safe corner of a big supermarket somewhere where we can all just shop while he smiles benignly on. He's born into a difficult, dangerous world. He becomes a refugee as a kid. And here was Steve Bell comes along and says, I want to do an album that brings all these themes out. It's still a Christmas album. It's still about the joy that's coming down, but actually it's bringing all this. You don't see the light if you don't know the dark background. And we were singing from the same hymn sheet there. We were really onto it. And I loved his word keening. So I put all my poems at his disposal that I had into that season for him to pick what he wanted and see how they might work into songs. And one of these poems was a poem called Refugee. And it was really my poem. You know, one of the things you get if you go the official liturgical year, the readings for the season, you're still inside the 12 days of Christmas when you get the Feast of the Holy Innocents, which commends that time and remembers, when Herod, fearing that there's a rival and having heard from the wise men that a future king is being born in Judea, just sends out word to slaughter every child under 2. And like Moses before him, when there was another slaughter going, he's hidden, not in a basket in the reeds, but hidden, with Mary, and they have to become refugees and set out to Egypt. And at the time, so many terrible things were going on in the world, and I felt like the Herods are still in power, the kind of Assads in Syria, and now, of course, Putin in Russia, people who think nothing of launching attacks on schools and children's hospitals. This isn't just the stuff of the biblical past. This is the world that Jesus still cares for and loves and is part of. So Steve took this poem, and sometimes a poem just becomes a song simply. Sometimes a poem is really only, as it were, a songwriter's starter kit. It's got a bunch of stuff the songwriter can take out of the box and use, but then the songwriter, having got the starter kit, is going to have to do a bit of thinking on their own. And Steve does a really interesting thing. He uses what I've got in the poem, but then he brings in some other stuff, interesting stuff about Christ and the sign of Jonah. All of those things. It's very interesting what he does with it. But when Steve, sent me the sort of tapes of this, and I was really struck by the contrast between the material of the song, the actual subject, and the tune. And then I realized Steve was doing a very clever thing. We were both reacting against the trivial, rinky-dinky, tinsely kind of Muzak side of Christmas. And what Steve has done is he's given a tune which could be just a jolly little Christmas ditty. And then he's subverted his own tune by the depth of the material. And you feel, as they say, the kind of cognitive dissonance between the two. And then it makes you really think about the content. It's an interesting thing he's done. Anyway, here's the original poem, Refugee. We think of him as safe beneath the steeple, or cozy in a crib beside the font. But he is with a million displaced people on the long road of weariness and want. For even as we sing our final carol, his family is up and on that road, fleeing the wrath of someone else's quarrel, glancing behind and shouldering their load. Whilst Herod rages still from his dark tower, Christ clings to Mary, fingers tightly curled. The lambs are slaughtered by the men of power, and death squads spread their curse across the world. But every Herod dies and comes alone to stand before the Lamb upon the throne. So you'll be interested to hear what Steve did with this one.
We think of him as safe beneath a steeple, or cozy in a crib beside the font. But he is with a million displaced people on the long road of weariness and want. For even as we sing our final carol, that hounded child is up and on the road, fleeing from the wrath of someone else's quarrel, glancing behind and shouldering their load, and shouldering their load. While Herod rages still from his dark tower, Christ clings to Mary with fingers tightly curled. The lambs are slaughtered by those men of power, and death squads spread their curse across the world. How terrible, how just, and how ironic that every Herod dies and comes alone, defenseless as the naked embryonic, to stand before the Lamb upon the throne, the Lamb upon the throne. I can't resist the burning urge for turning this song into a cautionary tale. The Savior whom this song has been discerning once occupied the belly of a whale, to reach as deep as love could ever fathom, to rescue from the tentacles of hell the wretched, the beleaguered and forgotten, surprisingly their enemies as well.